All right, I'm gonna give you some fitting adjustments for a princess seam that goes to the shoulder, so for the back, and I'm gonna show you how to make these adjustments for a pattern that's on the fold or has a center back seam, because they're slightly different. You have a few more options with a center back seam. So this first one here is a little bit of an armhole gape. Remember, this is a 50% size form, so that armhole gape would be quite significant, especially if this was a sleeveless garment. And this little armhole gape, because we have this princess seam, we can utilize it, and maybe we can slide it right into that princess seam. So what I usually do when I see this is I slide it up onto the shoulder. And you can see I got this little dart amount, and if this were just a proper set-in armhole with no princess seams, that's where we would put it. We would put it into a dart at the shoulder. So let's see if we can do that. Now, the thing you need to decide is, can I take all of it out on one side, or can I split it between the two? Splitting it between the two is going to be a lot easier to deal with. So if it's going to work doing that, I would suggest trying to drape it that way. So we'll push this into the seam and see if we can get it right down the middle, like split the difference of this amount. And it looks like we can, so mark this amount. Now the other thing you want to do is to see how far down along the seam do you need to go. Hopefully it's not really longer than like a typical shoulder dart. So about here, and that makes sense. This is kind of the start of the upper back here where your shoulder blades are. And having that shaping pointing at that makes complete sense. So we can mark it if we want to say, all right, we need to be finished getting rid of that excess at that point. But most likely, you probably shouldn't go much further than the length of a shoulder dart, which is about 3 inches. All right, so let's look at our next fit issue. For this one here, we can see we have a lot of excess right here at the back. And the trick with these kinds of adjustments is trying to figure out where on earth do I need to get rid of this, right? You can kind of tell that most of your seams are all, in the right place. Everything's looking pretty good. And now you need to decide, well, is this up high? Is it in the middle of my back? And what I would do is just play around with a few things and see. So this one here, if we were to pinch it out right up here at this high flat area, let's just pinch that together and see if we like that. And that looks pretty good, it looks like everything's staying pretty much on track. And if you have this adjustment, you're trying to figure out, do I need this adjustment? For this flat version, so flat meaning we want to flatten the pattern. So usually when we're speaking in terms of fitting adjustments, the name of the adjustment is what you're going to do to the pattern. That's what you need for the body. So for this, we obviously have a lot of space in here. The pattern's very rounded. We want to flatten it. It's going to be creeping up onto your neck, the back, or it's going to just kind of droop below your waistline here. Maybe it feels kind of fussy back there. If it's a fitted garment, you're seeing all this excess. It feels like it shifts around a little bit. And if you have a rounded back and you need more space here, this is going to be short. It's going to sit below the neck. It's going to be pulling on your front neck. It's definitely going to feel a little bit tight back here, especially when you're sitting down. I notice these things when I'm sitting down most, that it feels a little bit like there's just not enough space here. In fact, sometimes it'll push the garment up on my neck because there's nowhere for it to go. The garment's looking for the narrowest location to sit on my body, and the neck is it. So it creeps up a little bit, even though really it's too shallow and I need more space up there. So for this flat back, we'll put this one up high, and we're going to keep this adjustment, keep the pattern on the fold for this adjustment, and I'm going to show you how to do it with a center back seam as well. It's going to be like a little wedge right at your neck seam all the way across both princess seams to this armhole shoulder area. And let me show you on a low back. All right, so this is looking very similar to the other one. We're seeing a little more volume closer to the shoulder blades, which to me says that this is a lower adjustment. It's not so much baggy at the shoulder up here. It's a little lower on the body. So if you naturally have a concave or flatter back, this is going to definitely feel too loose for you. Now, if this was the opposite adjustment, just like before, we would feel some constriction across the shoulder blades, and we might even feel it digging in on our armhole in the back there. So for this lower back adjustment, now you could do this one of two ways. I feel like you kind of by the end of this will know how to do it if you wanted to create a wedge going straight across to the armhole. So I'm going to show you how to do that at the neck. So you could do the same thing lower here. But this time, let's try and utilize the princess seams and use them, because look at how baggy this is right here. We can actually take in the princess seam and utilize that. That way we know we're not going to be changing any other seams. So let's see if we can do that. Sometimes you'll think, oh, I have this length issue happening, and then once you get that fabric pulled out, you're like, oh wait, actually the length is fine. It's just that this was feeling sloppy and pushing onto the other areas of the body. All right, let me show you how to do this on a rounded back, because we're gonna slice that one open. All right, so let's add some space to the shoulder blade area of this pattern. So if this was a garment that was too flat for your body and you needed more contour back here, when you have the princess seam in the shoulder, we can utilize that to make the adjustment. Now you can do the same kinds of adjustments where you cut straight across and open them up and close them, but if we have the seam, we might be able to use it to our advantage. So what you want to do is pop open this seam right here in the area that it's the tightest. I'm going to use my scissors since I have my seam taped for visibility. You can see a little bit of the seam allowance is poking through there. All right, so we've cut open the seam. Maybe you popped open the seam there. And now you can let it relax and splay apart. Put a little piece of fabric behind there, and then this amount right here we could add to the pattern to help it fit the shoulders better. Kind of the opposite of what we do for a flat adjustment there. So let's mark this down and then we can add this to the shoulders. All right, we want to remove the armhole gape that was right here, and we slid it to this princess seam here. So we're going to measure the amount that we took it in, and we're going to remove that on either side of the princess seam, because that's the most ideal. If we can do it symmetrically, that way we won't have to monkey around with changing our seam length to match. All right, so I'm going to remove that amount there. And I'm going to also remove it on the seam line there, and then we'll add back our seam allowance. So we'll pretend like there's no seam allowance in my pattern right now, and we're just removing this amount that we need to get rid of here. So we'll do the same on this piece here, and we're going to blend it in. And remember, we really want this to blend in probably within a shoulder dart's length, but if you find that it is longer, it's okay to do that. So we're going to try and get rid of this in that same amount that we have here. Can be a little nicer to ourselves and try and blend it in there. And then from there, we're gonna, okay, and then on this one here, same thing. We're gonna try and blend it in again. So now we wanna add back the seam allowance to our new seam line. Try not to get confused here. It's really easy, but if you think about it very methodically, like, okay, I'm working on my seam line, now I'm working on my seam allowance, it will kind of help. And that's why I like to show you sometimes working on the seam line and then with the seam allowance, because it's a lot easier to be accurate if you start on the seam line. All right, so then let's trim away this old amount. If we're removing equally on this pattern piece, most likely your seam length isn't going to change, but I always recommend double checking it. If it's changed in length and you don't think it's going to sew together, you need to adjust it up here. So once you find out if it is going to match or not, and you're finding that one is longer than the other, then what I would do is adjust it up here at the shoulder, because we didn't change this down here. We don't really want to monkey around with that. All right, and then you also want to make sure that you still have a nice smooth transition at your shoulder seam there. And connect your neck and your armhole points at the shoulder straight across, and then add back your seam allowance. This one looks pretty darn good. And then you will have gotten rid of that armhole gape, because basically what we did was we just made our shoulder dart on this princess seam a little bit deeper. If we were using a set-in armhole without a princess seam, we'd be adding a shoulder dart or deepening a shoulder dart. All right, and then let's compare our new to our old, and you can see that little wedge is gone. Same with this. All right, so first I'm going to show you how to do a flat back adjustment. We're going to get rid of this excess here, and then I'll show you how to do it the other direction. So because we want this pattern to stay on the fold, we're going to make our cut for this high back adjustment right at the seam line of the neck. So I'm going to stack my patterns here right on the seam line here as if they're sewn. I'll use a little bit of removable tape there. And we're going to draw a line from our neck straight across, just like that. Now we need to make these changes to both these pieces, and when I make this cut, because our hinge is going to be right here, we're going to be lopping off the top part of this piece completely. This one will be hinged, so we just have to be careful. And so it's really good to bear that in mind so that you make sure that when you make this adjustment that you don't lose one of the pieces and you can't line it back up again. So we'll make this cut, and I've got tape going across so everything is secure. And then we'll make our hinge. And now you can see, even though this piece is cut off, it's still attached here. That tape is helping us. So now let's draw the amount that we want to get rid of. And remember, in this high back area here, you don't really want to go much more than like 1/2 or 5/8 of an inch. All right, so we'll drop this down, put that neck seam right on there. And this is my center back right here. This right here is just excess paper. So we'll secure this. And we need to secure these independently, so try not to tape to this piece when you're doing this. And now we'll tape this one over here. My removable tape is going to be a little bit of an issue because I taped a little bit on there. So now we can remove the removable tape and get these apart from one another. All right, and then now we have that wedge taken out, and we have it on both pieces, just like that. So now the last thing we need to do is make sure we still have our right angle here. And you see this little bit of paper sticking up there. We just trim that off. We don't want it to confuse us. So just get rid of that. And I would definitely secure this from the back. So we'll have a little bit of a bump here, and we can true this, smooth it out a little bit. I don't think that's going to be a different seam length or anything. We'll true that out a little bit there and a little bit right here. Now, as far as the seam length goes, because we had these taped together along the seam line and we lowered them together, you should have removed the same amount on each of these seam lines, so it will still sew together. But it's always a good idea to double check, and also make sure that when you sew this back together, you have a nice smooth shoulder here. And same thing, we always line up the 2 points. Line up our neck and armhole along the shoulder, draw back in our seam allowance, and then trim off any excess so we keep a nice smooth shoulder transition, because we really want it to sew to the front and we don't want a little bump there. All right, let's do a little comparison here. You can see what we changed. So we pulled this neck and the shoulder down, and just the shoulder a little bit on this one here, and we've canted it a little bit this way as well. And I would definitely smooth this out right here. You can see that I have a little bit of a bump. It would be a little more noticeable on a larger size. All right, so that's the flat adjustment. Let me show you the rounded. Now we're basically going to do the exact same thing. It's a little trickier because we need to keep these pieces independent of one another when we add our wedge of paper. So again, I'm going to line these up as if they're sewn. And this time I'm going to be a little bit strategic, and I'm going to put my removable tape in a couple different pieces. Maybe this will help. And again, we're going to draw a line from our center back right up here at the neck. This only works to keep our pattern on the fold if we slice at our neck seam there. Now we're going to cut this apart all the way up to that armhole, creating a hinge right here. Now these two pieces are completely separate now, so now we need to put a wedge of paper in here so we can raise it up, and you need 2 pieces of paper. Make sure you tape these independently. So tape this one to one piece here, and this one to this one over here, like that. I've done this so many times that you get really good at not attaching these pieces to one another. Oh, we lost our hinge. That happens. It's okay. Next thing we're going to do is going to continue our center back fold line here, just like this. And then we're going to add the amount that we want. And now let's put our hinge back together here. I'm gonna hold it like it's hinged, and we're gonna pivot this so that our neck seam hits that hatch mark there. And now remember, tape these independently of one another. So we'll tape this one over here and this one right here. Make sure this little piece of paper didn't overlap. All right, now we can take out our removable tape. There we go. So now we have two pieces, independent. It's like magic. And now we can true this edge here, blending that and blending this one here. Blend your shoulder and your armhole, or your armhole and your shoulder. We have our center back right here, but let's make sure at our neck we have a nice right angle. And this time I can see it's a little bit above, so this is when you have to choose, you know, do we fill in this little circle here to bring it over to get a nice right angle, or do we trim away at our back neck there? So the choice is yours. It's a pretty negligible amount, and it's not going to affect your neck seam. All right, let's compare. All right, we added a little bit there, and we kind of canted it toward the outer shoulder. Added the shoulder and the neck there. And that gives you a little more space in that area there. So as far as the consequences go for this high flatten, this high rounded back adjustment, if you have a neck facing, you're probably going to need to redraft that, and I can show you how to do that real quick. And same with the shoulder. If you have a shoulder facing, this is a sleeveless garment, you're probably going to find this little wedge here or here has changed the shape of the pattern, so you might need to redraft that too. But as far as your neck, your shoulder, and your armhole, anything that sews to those, as far as a seam length, it's going to be fine. Your sleeves, your collars, your shoulders, all going to sew together. All right, if we needed to draft a new neck facing, we're going to take our pattern piece, draw our center back, our neck, and a bit of the shoulder. Now, this depends on how wide this section is. It's usually wider than any facing that you're going to sew to it. So you just need those lines there. Now you're going to look at your original facing, figure out how wide it is, and we're going to transfer that same width to our new piece here. It's usually roughly in the 2-inch realm. Mark your fold, because it's very easy to get confused which is the fold and which is the shoulder. In fact, I usually like these little pieces to be a whole pattern piece, and then I put a notch right here, so it's very easy to tell. And then that's it. That's all you need to do for your facing. Connect your hatch marks. This is on the fold, and you're good to go. And you're gonna do the same thing for an armhole facing, but you need seam allowance at the shoulder and at the side seam. We'll trace it and then measure the depth, and you're good to go. All right, so for this lower back adjustment that we're gonna utilize the princess seam for, let me show you the flat one first. And for this one here, we're gonna measure where we want to remove this. So I'm gonna measure down to my first pin. It's about right here. And then to our next pin down here, which is pretty low down. We're gonna work in this section here. And at the fullest amount, we'll mark that at the fullest point here. So it's about right here. And I'm working on the seam line, so ignore the red there. And we'll do the same thing on this side. So now we're trimming away, and I did a lot on this pattern. So first thing I'm gonna do is draw it in on our seam, our pattern piece here, and we're trying to meet those hatch marks. Now, if you need to sort of bend it a little bit to your favor, I think you're gonna have to sometimes in some of these really extreme, like this is a very extreme case. You can always refit it and see. All right, so now we have that, and now we're going to redraw in our seam allowance parallel to that edge. And blend it in. I'm trying to blend it in by the time I get to the seam line here too, just so I know I'm roughly in the same place as both sides. All right, let's trim off our excess. When I get to the cutting part, I usually can smooth out any rough transitions. It's a little more intuitive than using the pen or pencil sometimes. All right, so that may look a little weird, so we flip it over to reassure ourselves. And that looks pretty good. So the last thing I would do is measure my seam to make sure that it's going to sew together. And I usually use a ruler. I'll walk it sometimes to see, but usually the ruler is more accurate. And if I see a difference like this right here, what I would do is line it up on that difference on the seam line like this. And this will be a great way to also check our transition. You can tell our transition's actually not really good at all. So let's tape this together. It looks even worse because we have this amount, this discrepancy here. So we're gonna connect our neck and our shoulder here along the seam line. And then we're gonna add our seam allowance back. We'll trim it down, and then we've fixed it. Let's look at it on the other side so it's not so confusing. And there we go, it looks really good. All right, so let's look at it on our original pattern here so we can see how much we removed. So we've flattened this pattern out. And this, on a princess seam, it's very obvious we're flattening it out, I think, because we got rid of this hump right there at the shoulder. Let me show you the rounded. Now for the rounded, we're trying to add fabric here and make it more rounded. So same thing, we're gonna put our marks on our pattern where we want to adjust this. So this time we want to expand. So we're gonna add a little piece of paper to this little area here. Oh, I could definitely have made that a little bigger. And I like to measure the full amount there at the max, and then I'll put that, you know, in between my 2 points, and then that's my goal. And I'm gonna split the difference. You know, I'm gonna put half of it on one side and half of it on the other. Now we can blend it in. And this time, because I'm outside of my cut line, I'll probably blend with my cut line rather than working on the seam line, which can be a little harder since I didn't mark it that way to begin with. All right, now let's trim this. It looks like we're going out right there, and we are, but that's okay. It might look a little bit like you're adding a hump to the pattern, but if that's what you need, add it. It won't look like that when you're wearing it. It'll look like a beautifully fitted garment. We're just trying to shape the contours of our body with any means possible. So when we look at it from this side, it's a little harder to see since I have the green paper, but you can kind of see it looks more of a transition than it does on the other side, right? So last thing we're gonna do, we check our seam length, and then we check our shoulder transition, right? Just like that. All right, and this one's pretty obvious what we've added, right? We can see that little green sliver there. Pretty obvious there, so that'll be great. And as far as consequences for either the flat or the rounded back affecting any of your other pattern pieces, this is usually far enough away from any other piece. If you have lining, obviously you want your lining pieces to match, but your facings, your sleeves, everything else should be fine. All right, lastly, I'm going to show you how to do some of these adjustments if you have a center back seam. Now, we did the flat and the rounded lower back on the princess seam, but let's say you wanted more contour at your center back right here. We can do that going straight across and then shape the seam to fit you. Same with the higher neck one. We can put that a little lower so we don't have to do it at the seam there if we want. You can still do it at the seam if you want, but it really won't give you much contour. So if you want the contour up there, put it down here on the seam. So the first thing we're gonna do, we're gonna try and sew this for as far as we can. And we'll keep our changes in that rough area there. So if we're doing a flat back, we're gonna cut straight across here, center back over. I'm gonna do 2 adjustment lines. You can actually do as many as you want. And if you want to do any in the lower area, you would want to retape this so that they match down here. All right, we're going to have hinges right here. We'll cut up to our hinge on either side of the seam. Now, this is another one of those. In fact, I'm going to give myself a little piece of tape down here where we are lopping these pattern pieces completely off. They're hinged on this one, but not on this one here. So make sure you have tape to help you keep track of them. If we were flattening this, I would draw my line on center back below each cut mark. And I like to work my way up the pattern. It doesn't matter, just so I don't lose track of what I've done and what I haven't done. And then we're going to lower this one here. A little cut piece is getting caught on itself, just like that. Cure it, and remember you need to adjust these to cure each one individually, and then do the upper one as well. And you can see now you have this nice contour at the center back. So this would be a flat adjustment, concave back, flat shoulder blades, erect posture, this will give you nice little molded back here. All right, so let's say we want to go the other direction. We want to round the back. Remember to tape your paper individually to each piece so that they are separate pattern pieces. And we would tape it to the bottom cut in each of these sections. It can be a lot to manage there. We'll do this one up here. And then we do our side ones. And again, keep them separate like that, and continue to do that for that one as well. And now this time we're going to square up on our paper, our center back seam, raise it the amount that we want, and then we secure these pieces individually. So we secure this one, and then we secure this one here, and then we do the same thing for this upper back. We're really drawing that line so we have a place to draw our hatch mark so we know how much to raise it. It's not going to change the angle. You don't need it to guide you. You just need it so that you can draw in how much you want to raise it. All right, and now we have this nice rounded shape here. And once you take these pieces off and secure all of your paper, you can trim your center back seam, add your seam allowance if it doesn't already have some, and you will have your nice rounded shape there, just like your flat back would be the other direction. All right, so let's compare. And we can really see that we've opened this up and kind of canted it over. Same with this one here. You can see that difference there. Now, as far as consequences go, if you did maybe enough shaping right here, high enough up, you may affect a neck facing, and same with your armhole, you may affect an armhole facing, whether you went flat or you did this rounded adjustment. Other than that, all your seams have stayed the same length. The sleeve will still sew, the shoulder will still sew. You just need to double check, make sure your princess seam here still matches. And we also need to make sure our seam transitions are nice and smooth. But as far as right angles go, we didn't affect our neck or our waist, so you're good to go there. And we just need a nice smooth line for our center back there with the seam allowance. Good job. I hope you're enjoying my Fitopedia fitting series, and if you want to get more fitting tutorials, just check the description. There's going to be links to more, and if you would like a printed version of these mini tutorials, just check the description or look under the video, and eventually you'll be able to make your own little Fitopedia booklet, and it'll be a really great, quick, easy reference to how to diagnose and fit the issue that you're working on. So I hope you're getting a lot out of the series. Please let me know, like, comment, and subscribe, and follow along for more. Thanks for watching.